She was just the cleaner's daughter, invisible amidst the gleam of chandeliers and the sound of the grand piano. But when her employer, driven by boredom or cruelty, threw down an impossible challenge, "If you can play this piece, I'll adopt you," no one expected what came next. Because Ayla couldn't read sheet music, she didn't have lessons, she wasn't allowed. But when her hands touched the keys, something happened, and the entire mansion trembled. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Leave it in the comments. And if you love stories that touch the heart and make us reflect on dignity, justice, and hope, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because here there's a new story to move you every day. The Duarte Mansion stood on a tree-lined hill in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, surrounded by gardens that looked like they'd sprung from a European magazine. Inside, the silence was broken only by the sound of the white grand piano, an imported Steinway that occupied the main hall like an untouchable sculpture. Helena Duarte, the homeowner, a 43-year-old white woman, spent her afternoons there, playing pieces by Debussy and Chopin with the discipline of someone who had never had to fight for anything, yet carried a deep sorrow, the inability to have children. Her husband, Armando, was a finance magnate, perpetually absent. Helena, to fill the void, had become a public figure in philanthropy, organizing charity events, appearing in magazines, but within her home, an unstable mood reigned, oscillating between charm and cutting coldness. Downstairs, amidst buckets, mops, and the smell of chemicals, worked Mrs. Sonia, black, 52 years old, her hands rough from scrubbing surfaces that would never truly be hers. For 13 years, she had cleaned that house, always with her head down, always with a soft voice. Her salary barely covered the rent for their shack in the suburbs, but she never complained, not to Helena's face. Ayla, her daughter, was 13, with large, observant eyes that captured every detail around her. On afternoons when her mother couldn't leave her alone, she'd bring her to the mansion. She'd sit in a corner of the service kitchen doing homework in tattered notebooks while hearing, from a distance, the sound of the piano. That sound fascinated her. It wasn't just music. It was another dimension of reality, a language she didn't know, but felt. Sometimes, when her mother went upstairs to tidy the bedrooms, Ayla would creep towards the hall, hidden behind the half-open door, watching Helena play. Her employer had long fingers, elegant movements, but Ayla noticed something. She played with precision, but without soul. One afternoon, it was raining heavily outside. Helena had gone out for an appointment, and Mrs. Sonia was on the second floor, finishing tidying the linens. Ayla, alone in the hall, approached the piano. Her heart pounded. She looked around, making sure she was alone. Then she extended her index finger and touched a key. The sound echoed through the hall, pure, vibrant, as if the entire house had awakened. Ayla touched another key and another. She didn't know what she was doing, but she felt it. Something inside her recognized those sounds, as if she'd known them from another life. "What do you think you're doing?" Helena's voice cut through the air like a blade. Ayla froze. Her employer stood at the entrance of the hall, her coat still damp from the rain, her eyes fixed on her. There was no anger on Helena's face. There was something worse, amused contempt. I'm sorry, Mrs. Helena, You think you can play my piano?" Ayla lowered her head but didn't answer. Helena took a few steps towards her, her heels echoing on the marble floor. She stopped beside the instrument and crossed her arms, watching the girl with a cold smile. "Do you know how many years I studied to play this?" she asked, her voice soft, almost maternal, but laced with venom. "How many hours of lessons, how many recitals, how many European masters I had?" Ayla didn't raise her eyes. "I imagine you don't even know how to read a single note, do you?" "No, ma'am." Helena let out a low, amused laugh. "Then I'll make you a proposition." She leaned in slightly, as if speaking to a small child. "If you can play a piece I choose, I'll adopt you." The silence that followed was dense, almost palpable. Ayla slowly raised her face. In Helena's eyes, there was mockery. It was a cruel joke, a commitment-free provocation, but in Ayla's eyes, there was something else, a strange, indecipherable spark. "I accept," the girl said, her voice firm. Helena blinked, surprised. She hadn't expected that. For a moment, the smile wavered on her face, but she quickly composed herself. "Very well, then prepare yourself. In 1 week, in front of my guests, you will play Clair de Lune by Debussy." She paused, savoring each word. "And if you fail, well, you and your mother will continue exactly where you've always been." Ayla nodded. Helena turned and left the hall, leaving behind only the sound of her heels and the echo of an empty promise. But Ayla didn't move. She stood there, before the piano, her hands trembling slightly. Because for the first time in her life, someone had given her a chance, even if it was a trap, and she wasn't going to waste it. That night, Mrs. Sonia said nothing. Ayla told her about the challenge on the bus ride home as the rain drummed on the fogged-up windows. Her mother listened in silence, her face impassive, but her fingers tightened on the strap of her purse. "My daughter," she began, her voice tired. "That woman isn't serious." "I know, Mom." "Then why did you accept?" Ayla looked out the window, watching the city lights glide by in the rain. "Because I want to play." Mrs. Sonia closed her eyes. She knew that tone. It was the same one Ayla's father used when he talked about music. Before he disappeared, before he died in an accident, no one quite explained. He played drums in bars, had perfect pitch, could replicate any sound he heard. Ayla had inherited that from him. But Mrs. Sonia had never wanted to nurture that gift. Music in their world was a luxury. Luxury was dangerous. "You can't read sheet music, Ayla. You don't know anything about the piano." "I know how to listen." Mrs. Sonia opened her eyes and looked at her daughter. There was something in that young face that frightened her, a determination she herself had never possessed. In the following days, the mansion's routine continued as always. Mrs. Sonia cleaned, Helena played, Armando traveled. But something had changed. Ayla now observed everything with a different intensity. When Helena played, she didn't just listen, she memorized. Every note, every pause, every breath between movements. At night, in the shack where they lived, Ayla would draw a paper keyboard on the floor and play the imaginary keys, humming softly the melodies she held in her head. Mrs. Sonia would watch her from the kitchen, her heart aching. In the mansion, Ayla began to hide behind the living room sofa while Helena rehearsed. She stayed there, motionless, breathing slowly, absorbing every sound, as if it were water in the desert. Helena never saw her. She was too busy with herself. But one day, Ayla made a mistake. She was alone in the living room. Helena had gone out for a meeting, and Ayla, driven by an irresistible impulse, sat down at the piano. She placed her hands on the keys and tried to reproduce the first phrase of Clair de Lune. The sound came out crooked, out of tune, hesitant. She tried again and again, until she heard footsteps. Mrs. Sonia entered the living room, her face tense. "Ayla, for heaven's sake, Mom, I need to practice. You'll get us kicked out." Ayla looked at her mother, and for the first time, Mrs. Sonia saw tears in her daughter's eyes. "I won't give up." Mrs. Sonia took a deep breath. She knew it was no use. So she did something she had never imagined doing. She sat beside her daughter on the piano bench and said, "Then show me what you've got." Ayla played. It was imperfect, shaky, but it had something, a spark, a truth. Mrs. Sonia closed her eyes and for the first time in years allowed herself to remember her husband. The sound of his drums, the way he smiled when he played. "Your father," she began, her voice choked. "He used to say music isn't in the notes, it's in what you feel when you play." Ayla looked at her mother, surprised. "He played," Mrs. Sonia nodded, wiping away a tear. He played like no one else. And then, for the first time, mother and daughter shared a secret. The days leading up to the challenge were the most intense of Ayla's life. She couldn't practice on the piano, Helena wouldn't allow it, so she had to create her own method. She took home a glass cup filled with water, and every night she dipped her fingertip and touched the rim of the glass, reproducing the frequencies she had memorized. Each note had a vibration, and Ayla learned to feel them in her body, as if the music were an extension of her skin. Mrs. Sonia, in silence, became her accomplice. When Helena wasn't around, she would let her daughter into the living room for a few minutes. Ayla played quickly, intensely, memorizing the feel of the keys under her fingers. She had no time for mistakes. Every second was precious. Helena, meanwhile, had started spreading the word about the challenge among her friends. She had turned it into a parlor game, a cruel entertainment. "You're going to love it," she'd say on the phone, laughing. "My housekeeper's daughter is going to try to play Debussy. It'll be hilarious." But something began to bother her. Ayla hadn't given up. She remained calm, focused, as if she truly believed she could do it. And that, somehow, took the fun out of the provocation. On the eve of the event, Helena summoned Mrs. Sonia for a talk. "Sonia, you know this is just a game, right?" Mrs. Sonia kept her gaze lowered. "Yes, Mum. Your daughter doesn't need to go through this. I can cancel." Mrs. Sonia raised her eyes, and Helena saw something she had never seen before: dignity. "My daughter wants to play, Mrs. Helena, and you gave your word." Helena frowned, annoyed, but she said nothing more. That night, Ayla didn't sleep. She sat on her bed, the glass of water beside her, playing Clair de Lune, note by note in her mind. Mrs. Sonia stayed awake too, praying softly in the kitchen. When the sun rose, they both knew. There was no turning back. The living room was packed. Helena had invited about 20 people, high society friends, businesswomen's wives, a few amateur pianists, all dressed in studied elegance, champagne glasses in hand, whispering among themselves with knowing smiles. In the center of the room, the white grand piano gleamed under the light of the crystal chandelier. Helena positioned herself beside the instrument, a radiant smile on her face. "Ladies, thank you for coming. Today you will witness something unusual." Discreet laughter echoed. "My housekeeper's daughter has accepted a challenge to play Clair de Lune by Debussy without ever having had a piano lesson in her life." Murmurs increased. "I promised that if she succeeds, I'll adopt her." Helena paused dramatically. "Of course, that's impossible, but I thought it would be fun." More laughter. One of the guests commented loudly, "Poor girl, this is cruel, Helena." "It's a lesson," Helena replied with false sweetness, "about knowing your place." At that moment, Mrs. Sonia entered the living room, gently pushing Ayla ahead of her. The girl wore a simple light blue dress, sewn by her mother. Her bare feet made little sound on the marble floor. The room fell silent. Ayla walked to the piano. She sat on the bench. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face was serene. Helena crossed her arms, watching with a confident smile. "You can begin." Ayla took a deep breath. She closed her eyes and placed her hands on the keys. The first notes of Clair de Lune began to sound. They were hesitant, almost fragile, but they were correct. The room held its breath. Ayla continued. With each measure, something changed. The music ceased to be technical and became alive. Each pause felt like a sigh, each note a confession. She didn't play like Helena played. There was no mechanical perfection, but there was something deeper: truth. The guests began to exchange glances, disconcerted. Some lowered their glasses, others covered their mouths with their hands. Mrs. Sonia, in the corner of the room, wept silently. Helena, frozen, felt something strange rise in her throat. It wasn't anger, it wasn't envy, it was recognition. For the first time, she saw Ayla, not as the housekeeper's daughter, but as a complete human being, with a soul she herself had never been able to express. When Ayla played the last note, the silence was absolute. No one applauded immediately. Then one of the guests, a retired pianist, began to clap slowly. Another joined in, and another. In a few seconds, the entire room was applauding her, standing. Helena, with tears welling in her eyes, couldn't move. Ayla rose from the bench, looked at her mother, and smiled. In the days that followed, the Duarte mansion was never the same. Helena kept her promise, not in the way she had said it, for the formal adoption never happened, but she did something that for Ayla and Mrs. Sonia was worth more. She fully funded Ayla's studies at one of the best music schools in the city. She offered Mrs. Sonia a permanent and dignified position at the foundation she ran, with a contract, a fair salary, and respect. But something deeper had transformed in Helena. She started playing less. When she did, it was different, as if for the first time she was seeking something beyond technique. Ayla visited the mansion on Saturdays to practice on the Steinway. Helena, who had previously ignored her, now sat beside her listening. Sometimes she would ask Ayla to play that first time again. "Play it like you played that day," she'd say. And Ayla would play, always the same way, with her soul. Helena's friends stopped visiting her. They said she had changed, that she had lost her spark. But Helena didn't care. For the first time, she felt less hollow. Armando, her husband, noticed the shift. One evening he asked, "What happened to you?" Helena looked at him and replied, "I heard real music." He didn't understand, but then he never really had. Years later, Ayla became a recognized pianist. Not famous, but respected. She played in small theaters, schools, and hospitals. She brought music to places Helena never had, to the invisible. Mrs. Sonia retired with dignity. She bought a small, simple house, but it was hers. On the wall, she hung a photo. Ayla at the piano on the day of the challenge, in her light blue dress. Helena never again organized empty charity events. Instead, she created a scholarship program for young musicians from underserved neighborhoods. She called it the Claire de Lune Project. And the white piano? It remained in the mansion's parlor. But now, when Ayla returned to visit it, the sound that came from it seemed different. As if the instrument had finally learned what it was to be played with soul. They say that on silent nights, when no one is around, the piano still echoes on its own, not with ghosts, but with memories. Memories of a girl who dared to play the impossible, and who, by doing so, reminded everyone that music, like dignity, never belongs to the one who owns the instrument. It belongs to the one with the courage to play. So, what did you think of this story? Leave in the comments if it made you reflect on something, or if you know someone who, like Ayla, fought to be seen, to be heard. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, hit that subscribe button now, because here, every day, we bring stories that move, inspire, and make us believe that, yes, the impossible can be played. See you next time, and remember, never underestimate the sound of someone who was taught to be silent.